When I saw my brother's handwriting on that envelope, handwriting I hadn't seen in 22 years, my legs gave out. I collapsed right there on my kitchen floor, the package scattered around me, and for the first time since I was 12 years old, I let myself cry for Michael. The ink was faded but unmistakable. Those careful loops on the S in Sarah, the way he always pressed too hard with his pen. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the letter steady enough to read, "Sarah, if you're reading this, then something happened to me before I could come home." The room spun. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. This was impossible. Michael was dead. He had to be dead. I'd been mourning him for 22 years, carrying the weight of that night when I fell asleep by the campfire instead of watching him. When I failed to protect him. But there it was, his voice jumping off the page like he was sitting right next to me. "I know you probably hate me for leaving that night, but I need you to know the truth about why I ran." I pressed the letter to my chest, breathing in the faint scent of cedar that still clung to the paper. Cedar. Like the woods where we used to camp. Where everything fell apart. I never stopped thinking about you, Sarah. Not for a single day. Everything I did to protect you. Protect me? I was supposed to protect him. That was my job as his little sister, and I'd failed so completely that our parents divorced, our family shattered, and I spent 2 decades building walls around my heart to make sure I'd never lose anyone again. But Michael was alive. Or had been alive. And somehow, through a mix-up with a package that wasn't even mine, he'd found a way to reach across 22 years of silence and guilt to tell me the one thing I'd needed to hear my entire adult life: it wasn't my fault. The wooden wolf carving rolled across the floor, the same one he'd whittled for me when I was 10. I picked it up with trembling fingers, and suddenly I wasn't a 34-year-old woman anymore. I was 12 again, sitting by a dying campfire, and my brother was telling me everything was going to be okay. Except this time, I believed him. You know that feeling when your life looks perfect on paper but feels hollow inside? That was me 6 months ago. Sarah Chin, 34, marketing coordinator, decent apartment, reliable friends, even a boyfriend who actually remembered anniversaries. From the outside, I had it all figured out. My morning routine was sacred: 6 a.m. alarm, 20 minutes for coffee and scrolling through news I'd forget by lunch, same route to work past the bakery that always smelled like cinnamon rolls I never bought. People called me organized. I called it survival. My apartment reflected this need for control: clean lines, neutral colors, everything in its place. James used to joke that it looked like a hotel room. "Where are all your pictures, Sarah? Your memories?" He'd run his fingers along my bare walls, genuinely puzzled. How do you explain that family photos feel like evidence of what you failed to protect? That some memories are too heavy to hang on walls? I kept exactly 3 photos: my college graduation, me and my best friend Lisa at her wedding, and one small frame on my nightstand, me at age 10, gap-toothed and grinning next to a campfire. You can't see him in the shot, but Michael took that picture. It's the only one I could bear to keep. Work was my refuge. I threw myself into campaigns and deadlines, staying late when the office emptied out. My colleagues thought I was ambitious. Really, I just preferred the quiet of an empty building to the quiet of an empty apartment. At least at work, the silence had purpose. James had been patient for 8 months, but patience has limits. Last week, he'd brought up moving in together again, his voice careful like he was approaching a spooked animal. We could get a place with better light. Maybe a 2-bedroom so you could have an office. I'd deflected with jokes about his messy bathroom habits, but we both knew I was running. I always ran when things got too real, too permanent. The thought of someone depending on me, of being responsible for their happiness, it made my chest tight with familiar panic. Tuesday evenings, I volunteered at the Missing Children's Resource Center downtown. I told people it was about giving back to the community. The truth was messier. Every missing kid's photo on those walls could have been Michael at 16, same desperate eyes, Same families torn apart by questions without answers. I'd help parents navigate police reports and social services, my voice steady and professional while my heart cracked a little more with each case. When kids came home safe, I celebrated with their families and felt genuine joy. When they didn't, those were the nights I'd go home and check missing persons databases until my eyes burned, still searching for some trace of a boy who'd vanished 22 years ago. Lisa worried I was too isolated. "You're like a fortress, Sarah. Beautiful and strong, but nobody can get in." She wasn't wrong. I'd perfected the art of being close enough to care but distant enough to survive the caring. My parents lived 40 minutes away in opposite directions, Dad in the house where we grew up, Mom in a condo across town. They'd been divorced for 20 years, but both still sent me the same birthday card every year, "Thinking of you." Never love, never anything that acknowledged the elephant in the room. We were all thinking of him, but nobody could say his name. Saturday mornings, I'd drive past our old camping spot without meaning to. The state park where everything changed. I'd park at the overlook and stare down at the forest, wondering if Michael had ever come back there, if he'd stood where I was standing and thought about that night when our family imploded. Sometimes I imagined seeing him on busy streets, a flash of dark hair, a familiar laugh, the way someone held their shoulders. My heart would race until the stranger turned around with someone else's face, and I'd feel stupid for the hope I couldn't quite kill. The worst part wasn't the not knowing. It was the knowing that I'd been the last one to see him alive, and I'd fallen asleep on the job. That kind of failure doesn't fade with time, it just learns to live quieter inside you, like a chronic ache you forget about until the weather changes. But that Tuesday morning, making my usual coffee in my usual way, I had no idea my weather was about to change completely. The doorbell cut through my Tuesday afternoon focused like a fire alarm. I was deep in a presentation about Q3 marketing metrics when that sharp, insistent buzz pulled me back to reality. I never got deliveries at home, everything went to the office for security. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery driver shifting impatiently from foot to foot, rain dripping from his yellow jacket onto a package tucked under his arm. The storm had started an hour ago, turning the hallway lighting gray and gloomy. "Chen," he asked the moment I opened the door, thrusting his electronic tablet toward me with practiced efficiency. His voice carried that end-of-shift exhaustion that made every delivery feel urgent. I signed reflexively, years of corporate life had trained that muscle memory. "Thanks," I mumbled, accepting the package. It was heavier than expected, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in brown paper that felt slightly damp from the rain. Multiple forwarding labels were layered on top like archaeological strata, each one telling a story of missed connections. Only after his footsteps faded down the hall did I really look at what I'd signed for. The address label made my stomach drop, Chen, Apt 4B. I lived in 4A. Same last name, wrong apartment. An easy mistake on a day like this. The package sat on my kitchen counter while I stared at it, coffee growing cold in my mug. I should just knock on 4B and hand it over. Simple. Except I'd lived here for 3 years and had never seen anyone in 4B. The mailbox slot always stayed empty. I tried knocking anyway. No answer. The silence felt absolute, like the apartment was holding its breath. Back in my kitchen, the package seemed to pulse with possibility. The brown paper was coming loose at one corner, revealing plain cardboard underneath. No return address visible. My fingers traced the forwarding labels, 3 different addresses, all crossed out, leading nowhere. What if it was something important? Medical supplies, legal documents, something time-sensitive? What if whoever lived in 4B was traveling, and this couldn't wait? But what if it was private? Personal? What if opening someone else's mail was crossing a line I could never uncross? The rational part of my brain said to leave it with building management. The curious part, the part that had been dormant for years, whispered that sometimes the universe puts things in your path for a reason. I told myself I'd just peek inside to find contact information. Just enough to return it properly. Nothing more. The brown paper tore easier than expected, like it wanted to be opened. The cardboard box inside had no markings, no clues about its journey through 3 different addresses before landing in my hands. I lifted the lid with the guilty excitement of a child sneaking Christmas presents, telling myself I was being responsible. Helping. The first thing I saw was tissue paper, carefully folded around something rectangular. My fingers moved of their own accord, peeling back the layers with surgical precision. What I found underneath stopped my heart completely. A worn leather journal, brown with age, the cover soft from years of handling. Written across the front in faded black ink, property of Michael Chen. The room tilted. My vision tunneled. Michael. My Michael. The brother who'd vanished into the woods 22 years ago and never came back. This had to be a mistake. Some cosmic joke. Michael Chen was a common enough name. This belonged to someone else, some stranger who happened to share my brother's name. It had to. But then I saw the photo. It slipped from between the journal's pages as my trembling hands tried to process what I was holding. A graduation photo, a cap and gown, that crooked smile I'd recognize anywhere, arm around a young woman with kind eyes and dark hair. But this Michael wasn't 16 anymore. He looked older. Maybe 18, 19. Happy. I dropped the photo like it had burned me. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up, and those familiar eyes stared back at me from a life I'd never known existed. My legs gave out. I sank into the kitchen chair, the journal clutched against my chest like armor. The leather was warm, worn smooth in places where his hands, had held it countless times. I could almost feel the impression of his fingers. There was more in the box. An envelope with my name written in handwriting that hadn't changed since high school geometry notes. Sarah. Just Sarah, in those careful loops that always pressed too deep into the paper. And at the bottom, wrapped in tissue like a precious artifact, a small wooden carving of a wolf. Identical to the one he'd made me for my 10th birthday. The one that had been lost in our move after the divorce. The world narrowed to this moment, this impossible collection of objects that belonged to a ghost. My throat closed. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the envelope steady enough to see my name. This was Michael's handwriting. Michael's journal. Michael's life, somehow, impossibly, continuing beyond that terrible night when I fell asleep by the campfire and woke up to find him gone. 22 years of guilt crashed over me like a physical weight. 22 years of believing he was dead, of carrying the blame for not watching him closely enough, of building my entire adult life around the fear of losing anyone else the way I'd lost him. But if this was real, if these things belonged to my brother, then everything I believed about that night, about myself, about the reason our family fell apart, all of it might be wrong. The envelope felt alive in my hands, pulsing with secrets that could rewrite my entire history. Part of me wanted to tear it open immediately, to devour whatever truth lay inside. Another part wanted to put everything back in the box and pretend I'd never seen it. Because if Michael had been alive all these years, where had he been? Why hadn't he come home? Why hadn't he found me? And if something had happened to him recently, if that's why these things were being forwarded to empty apartments and wrong addresses, then I was about to lose him all over again, just when I'd found out he might have been alive. My coffee had gone cold. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against my windows like the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd discover in my brother's own words. I opened the envelope. The letter shattered everything I thought I knew about that night, but it raised more questions than it answered. Michael wrote about running to protect us, about someone threatening our family, but the handwriting grew shaky toward the end, like he was scared or in a hurry. It cut off mid-sentence. I have to mail this now before. Before what? Before he died? Before someone found him? I called in sick Wednesday morning and became a detective in my own life. The package had traveled through 3 forwarding addresses, each one crossed out in different colored ink. Someone had been chasing Michael Chin through the postal system, and I was going to follow that trail backward until I found answers. The first address led to a dead end, a demolished apartment building in Portland. The second was a P.O. box that had been closed for 6 months. But the third, the original address, made my hands shake when I Googled it: Cedar Falls, Oregon. 400 miles from home, but only 50 miles from the state park where we used to camp. Where Michael disappeared. I drove to the post office with the package, feeling like I was carrying evidence of my own resurrection. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes and infinite patience, traced the forwarding history on her computer. "This M. Chin requested mail forwarding 6 months ago," she said, frowning at her screen. But the original forwarding request came from Cedar Falls 18 months before that. Looks like they were moving around a lot. Is there a phone number? Any contact information? She shook her head. Just addresses, honey. And they all lead back to you now. That night, I Googled everything: Michael Chin Cedar Falls, Michael Chin Oregon, Michael Chin missing person. Nothing. But then I remembered the photo, the young woman with the graduation cap and kind eyes. I'd stared at her face for hours, memorizing every detail. Reverse image searching led nowhere, but something about her smile nagged at me. I pulled out the photo again, studying their graduation gowns. The logo was too small to read clearly, but the building behind them looked familiar somehow. Thursday morning, I called information for Cedar Falls. "I'm looking for someone who might have known my brother," I told operator after operator, my voice getting steadier with each call. Michael Chen. He would have been in his late 30s. Most people had never heard the name. But then I reached Elena Rodriguez at the Cedar Falls Community Hospital. "How do you know that name?" Her voice went sharp, guarded. "Who is this really?" My heart hammered. "I'm Sarah. Sarah Chen. Michael's sister." Silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, "That's impossible. Michael said his family was dead. Dead. To him, we were dead." The guilt I'd carried for 22 years twisted into something sharper, more complicated. "Elena, please. I found some things that belonged to him. A journal, photos. I think something happened to him. I can't talk about this over the phone." Her voice cracked. "Michael made me promise never to contact his family. He said it would only cause more pain." More pain? I was crying now, standing in my kitchen holding a phone that connected me to someone who knew my brother after I thought he was gone forever. "Elena, I've spent half my life thinking I failed him. Please. I need to know what happened." She was quiet for so long I could hear hospital sounds in the background, beeping machines, muffled conversations, the soundtrack of people fighting to stay alive. "He talked about you," she finally whispered. "Every day. Said you had the biggest heart of anyone he'd ever known. Said he was protecting you by staying away. Protecting me. Just like his letter said." "From what? Who was he protecting me from?" "Meet me Saturday at the Cedar Falls Diner on Main Street. 2 o'clock. Come alone." Her voice hardened. "And Sarah? Bring whatever you found. If you really are his sister, you deserve to know the truth about why he could never come home." The line went dead, and I stood there holding the phone, shaking with the knowledge that in 3 days, I was going to meet someone who had loved my brother while I thought he was dead. I spotted Elena before she saw me, the same kind eyes from the graduation photo, now framed by laugh lines and 20 years of living. She sat alone in a corner booth at the Cedar Falls Diner, nervously shredding a napkin, checking the door every few seconds like she was expecting someone dangerous to walk in. When our eyes met, time stopped. Her face crumpled with recognition, and I knew she was seeing Michael in my features the same way I was seeing him in her presence. "Oh my God," she whispered as I slid into the booth across from her. "You have his eyes. Exactly his eyes. I placed the package contents on the table between us like sacred relics. The journal, the photos, the wooden wolf. Elena's hand flew to her mouth when she saw the carving. "He made that for you when you were 10, she said, her voice breaking. "He told me that story 100 times. How you lost the first one in the move after your parents divorced, how guilty he felt that he couldn't replace it for you. You knew about the divorce? About our family?" My chest felt tight with disbelief. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I knew everything, Sarah. Every story, every memory, every regret. You were the first person he talked about when we met at community college. My little sister Sarah, he'd say. She's probably in college now, probably dating some guy who doesn't deserve her. College." The timeline crashed over me like a physical blow. "When did you meet him?" 7 years ago. He was 29, going back to school to become a social worker. Said he wanted to help kids who'd been separated from their families. She laughed through her tears. He was so nervous about taking the entrance exam. Kept saying he wasn't smart enough, that he'd wasted too much time. 29. 7 years ago. Michael had been alive when I graduated college, when I started my first job, when I moved to this apartment. He'd been alive through birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday afternoons when I'd stared at his empty chair at restaurant tables. "Elena," I whispered, afraid to ask the question that was clawing at my throat. "Where is he now?" Her face transformed into something so full of grief I had to look away. "He died 3 months ago, Sarah. The police called it an accident, said he lost control of his truck on Mountain Pass Road during a storm. But I knew better." The diner spun around me. "Found and lost in the same breath." "What do you mean, you knew better?" Someone had been calling him. Threatening calls, always from different numbers. Michael never told me details, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He'd started looking over his shoulder, checking locks twice, making plans. She touched the journal with trembling fingers. "That's when he wrote most of this. And when he mailed the package to his old apartment building, hoping somehow you'd get it if anything happened to him." "Who was threatening him? Why?" Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Your Uncle Rick." Michael said Rick had found out he was still alive, that he was planning to come home and tell the truth about that night at the campground. Uncle Rick. Dad's business partner, the man who used to give us camping gear and fishing advice. The man who'd been at the search when Michael disappeared, helping coordinate search parties, comforting our parents. Michael saw something he shouldn't have that night, didn't he? The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Elena nodded. "Rick had been stealing from your father's construction company for years. Michael stumbled onto him burying evidence in the woods, financial documents, I think. Rick gave him a choice, disappear forever, or watch his whole family suffer the consequences. So he ran to protect us." My voice came out as a whisper. "He ran to protect you," Elena corrected, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Everything he did for 22 years was about keeping you safe. Even falling in love with me, even building a life here, it was all temporary in his mind. He was always planning to come back to you, Sarah. He just needed to find a way to do it safely." I looked at the woman across from me, this stranger who'd loved my brother, who'd known him as an adult, who'd been his family while I mourned him, and felt something shift inside my chest. The guilt I'd carried for 22 years wasn't dissolving, exactly, but transforming into something different. Michael hadn't died because I failed to protect him. He'd lived because he'd chosen to protect me. Elena and I sat in that diner booth for 3 hours, sharing stories about the same man from completely different lifetimes. She showed me photos on her phone, Michael at 25, learning to change a tire, Michael at 30, graduating with his social work degree, Michael just last Christmas, flour in his hair from attempting to bake cookies. Each photo was a stab of joy and loss combined. This was my brother, alive and laughing and becoming the man I'd always hoped he'd become. This was also my brother, living a full life while I carried guilt like stones in my chest, believing he was dead because of me. He kept this, Elena said, pulling a worn piece of paper from her wallet. It was a newspaper clipping about my college graduation. Somehow he'd found the tiny announcement in our hometown paper. He was so proud, Sarah. He carried it everywhere. That broke me completely. I sobbed right there in the diner while Elena held my hand and strangers pretended not to stare. Michael had been watching over me from a distance, celebrating milestones I thought he'd never know about. But now Elena was asking me to do something that terrified me more than 22 years of guilt. Rick is still out there, she said quietly. Still living in your hometown, probably thinking he got away with it. Michael's journal has everything: dates, bank account numbers, documentation of the embezzlement. He spent years building a case, waiting for the right moment to come forward safely. She slid a business card across the table. Detective Martinez, Cedar Falls Police Department. I've been working with her since Michael died. She believes his accident wasn't an accident, but she needs more evidence. She needs family to come forward. Family. The word felt foreign in my mouth. I'm all that's left of his family. No, Elena said firmly. You're the beginning of justice for him. But Sarah, if you decide to do this, there's no going back. Rick will fight. He'll try to discredit Michael's story, maybe even threaten you the way he threatened Michael. Are you prepared for that? I stared at the business card, my hands shaking. For 22 years, I'd lived small, careful, contained. I avoided commitment because people left. I avoided risk because loss hurt too much. I'd built my entire adult life around the fear of failing someone the way I thought I'd failed Michael. But what if I was wrong about everything? What if Michael's greatest act of love wasn't disappearing that night, but trusting me to finish what he started? What if I messed this up? I whispered. What if I'm not strong enough? What if Rick wins and Michael's sacrifice was for nothing? Elena leaned forward, and for a moment I saw exactly what Michael must have loved about her, the fierce loyalty in her eyes, the way she made courage look possible. Then you'll be exactly like your brother was at 16, scared, uncertain, but willing to risk everything to protect the people you love. She touched the journal again. He believed in you, Sarah. Even when you didn't believe in yourself. Don't you think it's time you found out if he was right? I thought about my careful, controlled life. My sterile apartment, my safe job, my relationship with James that I kept at arm's length because getting too close meant risking too much. I thought about my parents, divorced and distant, both carrying pieces of a broken family that might not have to stay broken. I thought about Michael, spending 22 years in exile, building evidence and planning his return, believing that someday I'd be strong enough to help him come home. Maybe I'd been preparing for this moment my entire adult life without knowing it. Maybe every missing child case I'd worked, every family I'd helped navigate their worst nightmare, had been training for this. I picked up Detective Martinez's business card and put it in my wallet next to the photo of 10-year-old me by the campfire. Okay, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Let's bring my brother home. Detective Martinez met us at Rick's construction office on a gray Thursday morning, 3 weeks after that life-changing conversation at the diner. I'd spent those weeks reading every page of Michael's journal, learning about the man my brother had become while building the courage to face the man who'd stolen him from us. Rick looked older than I remembered, graying at the temples, softer around the middle, wearing the comfortable authority of someone who'd never faced consequences for his choices. When he saw me walk into his office, his face went white. Sarah? His voice cracked slightly. What are you doing here? I set Michael's journal on his desk with trembling hands. I'm here about my brother. The color drained from his face completely. Your brother ran away 22 years ago. What could you possibly? He didn't run away. My voice was stronger than I felt. You threatened him. You told him to disappear or you'd hurt our family. A 16-year-old boy chose exile to protect us from your greed. Rick's eyes darted to Detective Martinez, then back to me. That's ridiculous. Michael was troubled, everyone knew that. He probably made up stories too. Bank account 4471B, I said, reading from Michael's careful handwriting. Sunset construction funds diverted through shell companies. $47,000 the first year, escalating to over $200,000 by the time Michael saw you burying the evidence. His face crumbled. 22 years of lies collapsed in an instant. You don't understand, he whispered, sinking into his chair. I was going to pay it back. The company was struggling, and I had gambling debts. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. But someone did get hurt. Elena stepped forward, her voice steady with righteous anger. Michael spent 22 years afraid to come home. He missed graduations, weddings, birthdays. He died still protecting a family that thought he'd abandoned them. Died? Rick looked genuinely shocked. Michael is dead? 3 months ago, Detective Martinez said quietly. Convenient timing, considering he'd just decided to come forward with evidence. I watched this man who'd haunted my family's nightmares for over 2 decades, and instead of rage, I felt something unexpected, pity. He looked small, broken, carrying his own weight of 22 years. Why? I asked. Why didn't you just confess back then? Pay the money back and take responsibility? Rick's eyes filled with tears. Because I was a coward. And because once Michael disappeared, I convinced myself he'd be fine. That he'd come back when he was ready. I never imagined. He looked at me with something like horror. God, Sarah, you were just kids. What did this do to your parents? To you? It destroyed us. The words came out flat, factual. Mom and Dad divorced. I spent 22 years believing I failed to protect him. Our family shattered because you were too selfish to face the consequences of stealing. Rick buried his face in his hands. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so goddamn sorry. Detective Martinez stepped forward with handcuffs, but I held up my hand. Rick. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Michael forgave you. It's in his journal. He wrote about how anger was poisoning him, how he had to let it go to survive. So I'm going to tell you what he never got the chance to say, we forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Rick whispered, will you tell your parents I'm sorry? Will you tell them Michael was a good man who deserved to come home? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I'll tell them. And Rick? Michael did come home. He's been home in my heart since the moment I opened that package. Outside the office, Elena and I stood in the parking lot, holding each other as 22 years of secrets finally saw daylight. He would be so proud of you, she whispered. He would be proud of us, I corrected. For finishing what he started. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like Michael's little sister again, not the girl who'd failed him, but the girl he'd believed in enough to protect with his entire life. You know what's funny about miracles? We spend our whole lives waiting for them to look like something grand and obvious, angels appearing, seas parting, dead people walking. But sometimes a miracle is just a package delivered to the wrong apartment by a tired delivery driver on a rainy Tuesday. That misdelivered package didn't just bring my brother back to me. It delivered me back to myself. For 22 years, I lived like I was holding my breath. I kept people at arm's length because getting close meant risking loss, and I'd already lost the most important person in my world. I thought love was dangerous, that caring too much was a guarantee of heartbreak. But Michael's journal taught me something I'd forgotten. Love isn't what we lose when people leave us. Love is what remains when everything else falls away. I called James the night after Rick's arrest. Instead of my usual deflection when he asked how I was, I told him everything. About Michael, about the guilt I'd carried, about why I'd been so afraid to let him all the way in. "I want to try," I told him, my voice shaking with vulnerability I hadn't felt in decades. "I want to stop protecting myself from happiness and start building something real with you." We moved in together 3 months later. Our apartment is full of photos now, pictures of Michael that Elena shared with me, pictures of our families, pictures of the life we're building together. James was right all along. Memories aren't evidence of failure. They're proof that love existed, that it mattered, that it changed us. I quit my marketing job to go back to school for social work, following the path Michael had chosen. Elena and I started the Michael Chen Foundation to help families navigate the system when someone goes missing. We focus on the siblings left behind, the ones carrying guilt that isn't theirs to carry. Last month, I helped reunite a family with their runaway daughter. When the mother collapsed in tears, holding her child for the first time in 3 years, I heard Michael's voice in my memory. "This is why we do the work, Sarah. This is why we keep believing people come home." My parents are talking again. Not romantic talks, that ship sailed long ago, but real conversations about Michael, about mistakes, about forgiveness. Dad kept one of Michael's wood carvings on his desk for 22 years. Mom saved every birthday card she bought him but never sent. We're planning a memorial service, not for the boy who disappeared, but for the man who lived and loved and chose sacrifice over safety. Elena and I meet every Sunday at the diner where she first told me Michael's story. We share memories, show each other photos, keep his spirit alive between us. She's become the sister I never knew I needed, connected to me by our shared love for a man who taught us both that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who you choose to protect. I still drive past our old camping spot sometimes, but now I don't feel the crushing weight of failure. Instead, I feel Michael's presence, his approval, his pride in the woman I'm becoming. The woods that once felt haunted now feel sacred, the place where my brother made the most loving choice of his life. People ask me if I believe in fate now, if I think Michael somehow arranged for that package to find me. I don't know about divine intervention, but I know this: sometimes the thing you're most afraid of losing has already found its way back to you. Sometimes the person you think you failed has been protecting you all along. That package was addressed wrong, but it arrived exactly where it needed to go. When I saw my brother's handwriting on that envelope 6 months ago, I collapsed on my kitchen floor and cried for everything I thought I'd lost. Today, I'm sitting in that same kitchen, but everything has changed. The wooden wolf Michael carved for me sits on my windowsill, catching morning light. Elena is coming over for Sunday brunch. She does that now, brings stories and photos and keeps Michael alive in our conversations. James is making coffee, humming off-key, completely at home in our space filled with memories and hope. My parents called this morning. Together. They're driving up next weekend to help us plan Michael's memorial garden at the Missing Children's Center. Dad wants to plant the oak tree. Mom wants to design the plaque. For the first time in 22 years, we're planning something as a family. I keep Michael's journal on my bedside table now, but I don't read it with desperate grief anymore. I read it with gratitude, for his courage, for his sacrifice, for the man he became while protecting us from a distance. Every page is proof that love doesn't die when people disappear. It just learns to travel through time and space, waiting for the right moment to find its way home. That misdelivered package was supposed to destroy everything, destroy the lies, the guilt, the walls I'd built around my heart. And it did. But sometimes destruction is just another word for liberation. People say there are no coincidences, that everything happens for a reason. I used to think that was just something people said to make sense of senseless loss. Now I know better. Sometimes a stranger's package contains exactly what you need most. Sometimes the wrong address is exactly the right destination. Sometimes a mistake by a tired delivery driver on a rainy Tuesday is actually a miracle 22 years in the making. Michael kept his promise. He found a way to bring our family home. And that package? It wasn't misdelivered after all. It was addressed to exactly the person who needed to receive it, at exactly the moment she was ready to open her heart to the impossible. Me.